Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindfuel, where we are making mental fitness accessible to endurance athletes so you can train your brain as consciously as you train your body. I'm Laura, the founder, and today, very happy to welcome psychotherapist, mental performance coach, and running and triathlon coach, Brant Stachel, to Mindfuel. Brant, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. This is really fun. It kind of combines all my worlds, so I'm excited to see where we get to with it.
It does. Brant and I were introduced by a mutual contact, and the first call that we had, it was an immediate connection and a lot of back and forth. So I think this conversation will certainly take us interesting places and be really beneficial for all of you. So, Brant, we start every conversation here asking our guests about who you are. So, said another way, how would a friend describe you?
Yeah, I'm probably the guy who never gave up the dream about running and all that stuff. So I started liking it at an early age and just everything I do is around running and sports and athletes and such. So they'd probably describe me as that. Uh, Probably the guy who's always willing to show up for you too. So anytime somebody needs something, I think that's why I got into the helper professions. But I don't ask that question very often, and I've never been asked it. So I think that would be an appropriate answer.
Well, we like to ask that question because so much of what we focus on is on what we do, including are we athletes? What are we professionally? So I think it's really important we remember that it's not what we do that defines us. It's really who we are. I say you've already started to mention sport. Why don't you dive into that a little bit more and tell us about your relationship with endurance athletics?
Yeah, I think I've come at it from friggin' every perspective you could possibly think of. So I started as a runner late in high school after being a great size for basketball in grade 8, but not so much in grade 10 when everybody else grew. And then got into running. I went to college, so here in Canada, and I did like okay, but I wasn't really that great. I think I graduated with a PR of 16:20 in the 5K maybe, so like decent, but not like world class. And then got into coaching. So I coached at the university level for 12 years, the high school level, post collegiately, all the way up to athletes chasing the Olympic Games in 2021. I was fortunate enough to have a guy who missed the Olympics by about 7 seconds in the 5,000. Fortunate or unfortunate, I suppose, depending on the way you look at it.
Yeah.
And then still have one or two athletes striving for 2028. And then also coach age groupers and everybody. So my marathon PRs of people I coach right now is like 2:15 to 6 hours plus. So everything you can think of in that gambit, I coach. And I also, in my not so free time, am a mental performance coach and registered psychotherapist. So my clinical practice covers two domains, primarily performance in sport, anxiety, confidence, etc. would be kind of the big describers. And then the other piece would be disordered eating. And then I don't do it anymore, but I'm also a registered massage therapist or a light LMT, I think, depending on the state you're in. So I have that designation. I've worked a little bit on the recovery side for athletes as well.
Cover all elements of the mind fuel spectrum, I would say.
I
So
try to,
you might
yeah, I
become
try
a
to.
regular here.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Brant, I understand that part of your clinical practice is focused on disordered eating and body image. How did you get into that, and how does that come to fruition? What does that look like with the patients that you work with?
Yeah, so like full disclosure, I had an eating disorder in college. And that was one of the first times that I came up against that. And at that point, there was like nothing. It was basically like guys don't have eating disorders. At that time, we talked about the female athlete triad. It's like, well, it's impossible to have an eating disorder if you don't have a period. We've adapted that sense to RED-S, relative energy deficiency syndrome. But so that's when I first got introduced to it, and I saw my injury risk go up, my performance go down, my emotions go all over the place, and really saw that I almost lost my sport for that. And so when I went back to school for my clinical psychology, I decided that would be the main kind of focus. So I did that, and then cognitive behavioral therapy for eating disorders through Oxford University. That's kind of the main subsection that I pull from in my clinical practice. And so within that practice, I see both men and women that are struggling, both in sport and out of sport as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I resonate. I've had my own struggles with disordered eating and body image and REDS, as well as I've shared throughout various posts in Mindfuel. And it's been my perception, and some of this may be because of the social media echo chamber I can build for myself, that this conversation around disordered eating and body image has gained traction. It's a little bit louder for female athletes. I think a lot driven, probably professionals speaking out more about this, writing books about it, raising awareness. I had some male athletes actually, as I was building Mindfuel and trying to determine the direction of what we were going to do, say that they thought this was an important topic, that they think it is pretty common, unfortunately, in endurance sport for both genders, but not spoken about maybe as much on the male side. So how do you see in your practice that the way that body image and disordered eating come to fruition are the same or different between genders? And how do those conversations go or look that may be similar?
Yeah, I think regardless whether it's man or woman coming in with disordered eating, they tend to both score very high on trait neuroticism. So they like experience negative emotion a little bit higher. They're very neurotic. They tend to be very focused on singular things, like something hooks and sticks, right? And so when I look at it like in combination with the sporting world, those traits actually can be really good as an athlete, but they can be really bad if you slant towards disordered eating. So the way I kind of think about it and first talk about describing it is every personality has a corresponding positive and negative. So the example I always use is assertiveness. I can be very assertive. It's sometimes bad, it's sometimes great. My wife has had to work on her assertiveness. So the downside for me is like not everybody likes how assertive I am. The positive for me is like I don't care what people think because I'm just pretty assertive and I'll say what I want to say. Now, that works for a lot of things that I do, but it sometimes doesn't work. Whereas my wife, as an example, when her assertiveness was lower, she wanted to please everybody. She wanted to make sure everybody liked her. She said the right things. That's great. People love you. Your Strava account goes up, your Instagram account goes up, all those things, right? But then you're always thinking about, did I say the right thing? You know, am I doing the right stuff? So every personality trait has a corresponding positive and negative. And so when we look at it from an eating disorder sense, it actually doesn't really matter, caveat, but it doesn't really matter whether it's male or female because it's the traits that are driving it. So broadly, men and women, if you look at personality traits, are more similar than dissimilar. So trying to break that out from a personality perspective, and that's the subsection I take when I move towards disordered eating at first, there's not much difference. And so it's more so understanding why, if you think of personality traits as like a volume dial, right? Why they can't turn it from 10 to 5. Because other people might be able to turn their neuroticism, their assertiveness, whatever, like up and down as the situation demands. Broadly, people that struggle with disordered eating or body image stuff can't turn that signal down. So when we explain it that way, that's when you can start getting into like the etiology of it. It's like, okay, was this a trauma response? Is this a competitive thing? So a lot of the times what we will see with practitioners is they'll see a runner who has an eating disorder and they'll be like, oh, you just want to be faster and it's all about performance. Actually, probably isn't. So it might be their coping mechanism, it might be their stress reduction mechanism that has a byproduct of performance. And so this is why going from a personality perspective first, understanding the history and the why can then start tailoring the way you might approach it.
I think getting to the why also, at least in my case, helped reduce some of the shame around it. It's like there's a lot of stigma about eating disorders or disordered eating in society. And I certainly felt so ashamed that, I couldn't just read a book and get over it. Once I understood, there are a lot of emotions that have built up in me over time through a number of different life experiences that have led to this. And for me, food became a bit of the way I felt in control when a lot of other things felt out of control. And full disclosure, sometimes that still comes up for me despite having done a lot of rehab over many years with this. And once I had permission to say, like, I don't need to shame myself and blame myself. There's underlying reasons and I can work through those. And we are all human. And I don't need to play the comparison game. It helped immensely just get over one of the first really big humps there.
Absolutely. The thing I say on that to my clients all the time is anything that's dark grows in the darkness. And so the best disinfectant is light. So this is why I like being able to talk about eating disorders. And I'll put something out. It'll be a hot take. But I actually think that there are a lot of running influencers that were posting and doing all these things and talking about their results and such, showing what they were eating, the food accounts and all that stuff when they had an eating disorder. And they profited, maybe not from a financial perspective, but from an influence type perspective, while they were in a bad place, portraying bad behaviors, who have now come over to the healthy movement and have not accepted the responsibility that they have in potentially causing and increasing some of the eating disorder behaviors we're seeing in the generation that's being pulled up behind them. And so I really struggle with that because as athletes, if we're on social media or we're seeing stuff and we see that and we go, hey, so-and-so has what I want, therefore I do what they do. I eat like they do, right? And oftentimes that's how you start disordered eating for people. So-and-so has what I want and they do this, or they cut this food group out. So you kind of go from the orthorexic pathway to pick your disorder, anorexia, nervosa, bulimia, whatever. So it tends to be an innocent start, and then they can't stop because they've got, like you said, on that control pathway, right? And so I think there's a lot of people out there in the running world that owe a lot of people an apology because they brought people along that way, and now they're profiting, so to speak, again off the other side of going, hey, we should fix this problem. And it's like, you kind of had a part in it, right? And I say that as somebody who certainly had that when I was younger, pre-social media, where it was like, I want to be a really good runner. That's what they look like. That's what they do. I grew up in the blog times, and I tried to follow that pathway. And so it becomes really, really hard to decipher where it came from or why it is. But I think at the end, like you said, it's like, well, I have control over something. And the messed up part, there's lots of messed up parts, but the messed up part is that because you perceive that as control, it's not actually control. It's trying to gather control over something that's actually out of control, when really what we want is what we would describe as like meta control, the ability to not actually think about and need to control this one aspect. Okay. And so that's one of the really hard parts on the therapeutic side, is getting somebody out of that like control spiral where they think they're in control, but it's just pseudo control. They're actually out of control.
Do you see this coming through in other mechanisms, not just food control? What else might that look like in specifically athletes? I guess humans in general, but specifically athletes.
Yeah, you can see it. So a spin-off of this per se would be the person who has to follow a training plan to the exact T and is willing to like run or train or ride themselves into the ground. So I would say that's the same type of behavioral pattern. So I used to joke, I had a bunch of juniors that I was coaching, and I'd write in 30 to 45 minutes of easy running, right? It was always 45, right? Like if they got to the parking lot at 30, 44, 50, they'd have to do the 10 seconds, right? So I started scheduling like 44 minutes and 23 seconds into their plan just to like beat their neuroticism. So it's like, see how absurd it is? It's just a number. And so I did that early on, knowing that I didn't want to create that neuroticism for them as athletes, and kind of like I said earlier, bring that out into the light that that's a neurotic type behavior.
Well, I'm guilty on all counts, so you would have called me out very quickly. If someone is struggling, whether with food and body image or some of this other kind of neurotic behavior, how do you recommend that they talk to their coach about it, or where can they go for help, and how do they bring that up even if it feels really hard, feels emotional? Like I said earlier, maybe there's a bit of shame there. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I'll back it up a little bit first on the athlete side, and I'll say I just did a course for USCA that I think is coming out in 2026 for coaches about developing space and understanding eating disorders. So I'll lead from that kind of lens. Where it's like, as coaches, we have to do a better job with our language and understanding. One of the things I learned very early on in my coaching career, when I was coaching people that, unfortunately were struggling, was something as innocent as like, athlete has a great race. I go, whatever you're doing, it's working. Just keep it rolling. Let's go. Right? In that excitement, they just crushed a race. And in my head, I'm thinking, you're crushing the workouts, the easy run, all that stuff. That's where the coach brain goes, right? The athlete brain goes, I didn't eat any carbs this week, and I just got praise from coach, right? And so we as coaches have to be better. That would be my first point, because if we're not mindful of things like that, and or creating the space for athletes to be able to come forward and actually have those conversations, an athlete will never come forward. It's like, for anybody who has kids, right? If you tell your kids, if you tell me I won't be mad, and then they come and tell you and they're mad, they're never telling you again, right? And so I think as coaches, that's the first place. And then as athletes, I would encourage athletes, if you think you're struggling, to come earlier to your coaches rather than letting it get a little bit more gone. I'd rather have that conversation early than when you're in the throes of it. And so sometimes you might not know, but maybe your partner says something, hey, I noticed you haven't really been eating a lot or something. Okay, maybe that's something I need to talk about. And so I think just creating that environment, and then understanding that there's a slippery slope when it comes to orthorexia. So I'll define that like an emphasis on clean eating. And so I want to be clear. I'm not saying the healthiest thing in the world is to go eat 2 pounds of gummy bears every day. I sometimes do that when I'm on the bike for 4 hours because it's like I need the energy. So there's a difference, right? And so that emphasis or overemphasis, let's say, on healthy, clean eating can be a slippery slope. So when there's rigidity around that, that's where as an athlete I might start going, hey, this might be starting to slip.
Kind of like what you said earlier, there's light and dark to everything. And when we sit in the extremes of either side is often where that's maybe not the best for humans. We are fluid people, and moderation is generally good in the long run. So there's always a balance between those extremes. And there may be weeks where super clean and strict and rigid eating makes a lot of sense, but when that becomes a habit and the only way, then maybe not the healthiest.
it's like anything else in life. Like the idea of work-life balance. Well, you're probably going to have months that are out of balance, and then you're probably going to have months that are in balance, right? And obviously it never happens, but obviously you want to hope that there's balance across like a year. And so that's where you have to look at behaviors over a longitudinal period. Now, if somebody is, let's pick the marathon as an example. So it's like the last couple of weeks and they're really trying, because they've struggled with GI distress on their builds and such, really trying to clean up, have more natural foods, more fiber, etc. Okay, that's a pretty good positive because you're trying to do that. Where it becomes negative is after the race. If you have good race, bad race, doesn't matter. And you go, that's it, I'm never eating X again. That might be problematic. Caveats aside that like some people actually do have digestional issues. So I'm not speaking to that population, to be clear. But I think that's where it becomes problematic. And one of the tricky parts about endurance sport is we operate basically on a really simple like reward structure. Do thing, get good result, continue to do thing, right? It's like, it's really simple. We're like a rat getting food. Like that's all we are as endurance sport. And so it's very easy to, what I say, make the deal with the devil and go down a disordered eating path and get a positive reward. But it's like the devil always gets their due. Like you will pay that back tenfold. Absolutely. And so that's where I try to educate athletes. I can see and I can understand why you're thinking that, because you're chasing this thing and you feel like this is along the pathway. And you might get it. But what most athletes, because as athletes we're very subjective about our sport and performance, coaches and therapists on the outside are more objective, is you can't quantify what the cost is, especially if you haven't experienced it or seen it. Right? And so that's where coaches and therapists, we have to be the ones to be objective and go, I see what you're doing. I understand it. I totally get why you'd think that, but the devil will get their due at the end of the day. And unfortunately, if I pull from the literature, one of the highest comorbidities for anorexics is obesity-related diseases. So put a different way, one of the number one killers of people who have struggled with anorexia for long periods of time in their life is obesity-related diseases. So the thing you feared the most when you're anorexic is the thing you will get. And so if you went to a more normative pathway, and I'm not saying this diet, that diet, whatever, but a more normative eating type behaviors, you're less likely to get to the thing that you hate the most. And so if you think you're in hell with the anorexia piece, because you've chosen that, chosen is a loose term for anybody listening, it's air quotations, gone down that pathway might be a better way to say it, it's going to be way worse on the back end for you. And so I try to educate my athletes and clients that way. It's like what you think you're getting in joy and happiness and success now is momentary relative to what you're going to get longitudinally.
Scary, but such an important thing to bring awareness to and to help people think very deeply about the decisions that they're making and really how they want to live.
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to dive into it a bit deeper before we wrap up, is given that this topic tends to be discussed a little bit more on the female side, particularly the history that you mentioned around female athlete triad, where for many years it wasn't even considered that men had this. How do you think we can raise awareness more in the male population and maybe destigmatize some of these challenges and bring awareness to what some of the symptoms might be so that more men can be treated?
Yeah, I think the move to Red S was really helpful, right? So we excluded diagnoses solely on the fact of menstrual cycle disruption. In fact, we even went way better because there's plenty of evidence to show that you can have hypothalamic amenorrhea, so you can still have menstruation but have menstrual cycle dysfunction. So we dug way deeper in that. We also included low testosterone, low sex drive on the men's side as well too. So for anybody interested, and I can provide the paper, there's a IOC, International Olympic Committee, consensus statement and questionnaire on it that athletes can look at themselves. And provide to their coaches and team or individual medical practitioners. But we opened up the inclusion criteria for it. And so I think oftentimes what's hard for guys, and I want to be clear, I'm not excluding women from what I'm about to say, but we're on the topic of guys, is that oftentimes the hardworking, driven type mentality we attribute to men. Again, plenty of women have it. It just tends to be more attributed. I'm not the one who says it. That's the way it is. And so that drops with Reds. So it hits a little bit more from an identity piece in terms of why they wouldn't want to do that. And so it's the same reason I see a lot of women not want to talk about their menstrual cycle dysfunction, because it feels like it's something that rightly or wrongly is kind of definitive to them as a person. And so I think with that inclusion criteria being made, where we can actually see, hey, this isn't just like Brant, some random guy who's a therapist talking to me about it. Like the literal International Olympic Committee did research on this and has posted a consensus statement and a category set of questions similar to what we would do for concussions, we can actually look at that now. So I think that information is really important to put out. And I think, for guys or women, even if you only cared about things from a performance perspective, even if that was the only reason why you cared, I'm not saying it should be, but let's say it is, right? We know that being in red S is going to decrease performance, let alone longitudinal health, reproductive health, if that's important to you, for both men and women, food, social relationships, all these things, right? And so I look at it and break it down that way in terms of, yes, it might be tricky. Yes, it might be hard to talk about. Yes, it might not be comfortable, but the reward for fixing it far outweighs the risk of being uncomfortable talking to someone.
Good advice. If you could leave us with one final piece of wisdom on cultivating a positive relationship with food and body, what would it be?
Stick to the norm. Don't go with trends. This is the reason why there's the idea of yo-yo dieting, which has been around since my mom's mom, basically, right? And so if we stick to the middle, as humans, we love stuff in the middle. So stick to what kind of works repeatedly over and over again, not what some person says that they fasted for 27 hours in a row or something like that, or cut out this food group. If you're focusing on a single food group or a single type of food or whatever, you're majoring in the minors and you've got it wrong. Think about it this way. If that one food was so deterministic of the outcome of your performance, why are you training? Just don't eat the food.
Great question. And actually, our bodies are pretty good about telling us what they need if we listen to them.
Yep.
Brant, thank you for all of these messages of wisdom today. I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers did too. As we said at the beginning, you do both physical coaching and mental coaching, so have a lot to offer. So how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to either work with you or just learn more or follow you?
Yeah, so if you want to work with me, whether it's run coaching or mental performance and or disordered eating, if you go to my website, so it's www.runfastandfree.com, there's access to my calendar there. You can book an appointment with my admin team to chat. If you want to follow some of the stuff I'm talking about or sharing, you can follow me on LinkedIn. My name, Brant Stachel. My Instagram is Fast and Free Coaching. And then we also have a YouTube channel where I'm providing some tools and tips for athletes, which is Fast and Free Coaching as well.
Awesome. I've been following Brant for a few months now and highly recommend that you all do too. Lots of good stuff coming out of his social channels. So a final thank you to all of you for watching and joining us today, listening to us. If this resonated for you, I ask that you please like and subscribe. Any follow-up comments or questions you can put down below or email us at connect@mindfuel.fit. And if you haven't already, check out the other videos on the YouTube or listen on Spotify and head over to our website, mindfuel.fit, to subscribe to our email and check out the rest of the resources that we have there. Thanks again and happy and healthy training.